Thank you, Chairman. I've been associated with this conference for the last 8 years, and I've seen big steps and strides that India has taken to improve relations and undertake various activities in ASEAN. In fact, I'm very impressed. I don't want to bore you with all the details because I think all of you all have read the plan of action of India for ASEAN from 2015 to 2020. And similarly, you're quite familiar with ASEAN's plan for what to do for the community up to 2025. Now, I thought I'll just focus on 3 key issues which I thought are important. I think the first one is, what is India's role in ASEAN? I must confess that I was a bit disturbed when I heard some of the presenters this morning talking about ASEAN being a region where there is a great game being played out, and even calling upon one of the superpowers to perhaps not interfere in any of the issues that ASEAN faces. I beg to differ. I just want to reinforce that ASEAN is, in my view, strong, and it has always faced problems. From day one, from 1967 until now, it has gone through many crises. And I'm quite sure that the current crisis that ASEAN faces among some member states will also sort itself out in a matter of time. But I think the key issue is, even on this issue of South China Sea, although there are competing interests to exert its influence, I think the key thing is that the players, the stakeholders in the ASEAN region and the greater Asia-Pacific region must stay involved. Just because one superpower is flexing its muscle, another emerging power decides to flex its muscle, does not mean that the other stakeholders to stay out of it. I think everybody has a role in the ASEAN region. Everybody has a stake in ensuring that the regional architecture, security architecture in particular, that's evolving, has a place for everybody. Even for India. India historically has been a maritime nation. You have got trading relations right up to Japan, right up to China historically. Your trading links go to Asia for many, many centuries. So you have a big presence in India, in Asia. The issue that I wanted to tell you is that 2 key issues are core to ASEAN. One is, everybody agrees that ASEAN remains a centrality in the architecture in Asia Pacific. 2 is that all disputes must be resolved in a peaceful manner. I think on this, all the ASEAN countries are in agreement. What I think there's some disagreement is what should come out in the communique, what should be reflected in the communique. I think that's the key issue that is taking place behind the scene. So the message that I would like to convey, particularly to our Indian thinkers and policy makers, is do not concede your space, and please guard your space in the region. That's very, very important. Because remember, the moment you concede, somebody else will claim that this is my territory, this is my space. And sometimes I wonder whether the Americans actually left the space when they said this is rebalancing to Asia. You have to ask yourself whether the Americans actually left Southeast Asia in the first place. They continue to be the biggest investor in Southeast Asia. They continue to have a big sizable military presence in the Asia Pacific and even in Southeast Asia. So just because an issue has arisen and competing stakeholders want to exert their influence, doesn't mean that the other stakeholders to take a side step and watch the scenario that's evolving. I think India should stay committed, do not concede the space, and I particularly like the statement of your Prime Minister when he gave the Singapore lecture in Singapore. He specifically mentioned that India will continue to ensure that the sea lanes continue to remain safe and for use by everybody who wants to use the maritime linkages. So my message is, please stay engaged with ASEAN. ASEAN needs you. ASEAN needs all the strong stakeholders to remain committed, because only with all the strong stakeholders participating and with everybody's support can ASEAN bring about peace and prosperity, not only for the ASEAN region, but also for the Asia Pacific region. So that's my first call. The second call is in the area of economics. I think economics is very important. I think Southeast Asian countries are trying to see where is the new avenue for growth, because with the slowdown of the economy in China, which was a big pooler of exports from Asia Pacific and particularly for ASEAN. Now China is reinventing its economy. They are moving from manufacturing towards consumption. India, on the other hand, is moving from consumption towards manufacturing. Now all this has great impact to ASEAN. ASEAN is trying to find itself, where do we get our next economic wing to grow? Now one way that some of the countries in ASEAN are trying to do is to do the TPP with the US, so that all these US investments will continue to stay in some of these Southeast Asian countries. And at the same time, they are also encouraging India, China and the other partners of ASEAN to get into RCEP. So it's also in India's interest to ensure that you get RCEP wrapped up, which I think will effectively replace the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement with the 6 partners in the long run. So it's critical for India, in order to stay engaged with ASEAN, that you sign on to RCEP and ensure that it's quickly implemented, because there are a lot of dynamic changes in the global economic patterns that are emerging. We are not sure. Everybody is talking about a 4th industrial revolution. Whether manufacturing is a solution for India's growth, I'm not so sure. Because the way it is, the global economy is moving, nobody knows where exactly the next growth wing is going to come. So it's critical. I think Chairman has emphasized accurately that economic cooperation is very essential. Let us work together. There are a lot of opportunities that have been identified by the Indian government and also by the ASEAN countries. I think there is a lot of scope to focus on. If we focus on many of these projects which have already been identified and both regions are working on, I'm quite sure we can ride on each other's wings and benefit each other. The third thing I wanted to make a point is, India is embarked on Make in India because you want to manufacture. Now, I just hope that when you emphasize this Make in India, there is also concern among ASEAN countries, whether you are going to take away investments which will also flow to ASEAN. So my suggestion is, while you talk about Make in India, please remember to ensure that the growth also flows to neighboring countries like ASEAN. Because you, being a very big economy, you have to carry the neighboring countries and ensure that they prosper with you. So this is something which I will look forward to Indian policy makers taking into account. How do we create supply chain, value chains together with the production centers in ASEAN, and how can you carry the development of ASEAN together with you, so that all the regions, all the countries in the 2 regions prosper together. Now I have various other suggestions on how we can move on in certain areas, but 2-3 suggestions. I think one of the key things is, when we talk about connectivity between Northeast and Myanmar and ASEAN, I think there's always a call for land connectivity. I think one of the speediest ways we can connect, with one of the chief ministers mentioned 2 days ago, was that air connectivity. I'm still puzzled why sometimes India calls upon ASEAN carriers to start the air connectivity, and why not Indian carriers start the air connectivity with ASEAN countries. And I'm surprised that even today we don't have air connectivity with Indonesia, we don't have air connectivity with Philippines. So I think this is an area where India can certainly move ahead and do more. The other thing I wanted to see is also that, although ASEAN is made of the 10 states, I think in some countries, bilateral wise, I think India can do more. I hope to see more bilateral projects and more bilateral economic projects being undertaken between Philippines and Indonesia in particular. I think these are 2 very big countries. The linkages are weak. I think if the linkages between these 2 countries are enhanced, I think generally the engagement of India with ASEAN, and particularly with these countries, will definitely benefit ASEAN and India. Chairman, I'll just stop there. Then we can